Well, thank you so much for coming. Some of you, a number of you were here for the first go round about a week and a half ago, and some of you were not. I'm going to do a little bit of review of that first session, trying to keep it relatively short. So there are kind of three parts, but the impetus for this is really the 250th anniversary of the Declaration and the celebration of the country's birthday, which we've now is in the rearview mirror, but we'll continue to be aware of that. I'm sure throughout the year. The other impetus for it is that church and state issues are a hot topic today, and that's not entirely new. There have been debates and conflicts about these issues really throughout the history of the country, but it's a hot topic today. You may have seen reports of last May, President Trump established a Religious Liberty Commission, and they reported out this past June 26th in a 200-page document, and sort of to catch the drift of their report, just a little excerpt here. Far too often in our national life, religion is treated as not as a protected and valued contribution to our public life, but as a problem or annoyance to be managed, restricted, or sidelined. So that was from this group appointed by President Trump. A response came from many responses, but one from Paul Rauschenbusch, the CEO of the Interfaith Alliance, who said that their report was a betrayal of the original intention of the promise of religious freedom guaranteed in the First Amendment. The report and the commission fail to represent and lift up the importance of religious diversity and tolerance for all faiths, not just for a special chosen few. So I'm just citing that this ongoing debate is a hot topic today. So let's begin with a quick review from part one. We looked at the First Amendment, noting, it's on your handout if you, and there's a couple loose ones here if you need one, that the topic of religion and the relationship between the church and state was the very first topic addressed in the Bill of Rights. So it was a hot topic then too. And in what I think is remarkable amount of condensation or brevity, the founders, in 16 words, address the issue in a way that it's kind of a balancing act. On the one hand, there's the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So that's what people refer to as the Establishment Clause. The government won't sponsor or sanction any faith or religion as the state-mandated faith of the United States. But the other part of it is religious liberty, freedom is guaranteed to all law-abiding citizens. So can you see how there's a bit of a this and that? It's two sides to it. Religious liberty guaranteed, but no government establishment of religion. And it's interesting that the term, they leaned into religious freedom in resolving many of the wars in Europe over religion. What happened was there would be an edict of toleration, which usually meant that the Catholic majority would tolerate the Protestant minority. But Madison said it's not about toleration, because if toleration can be extended, it can also be taken away. So they went beyond saying toleration to religious freedom. At least in recent decades, and I think it's the folks on the liberal side of the political spectrum have tended to lean into the first half of the 16 words. That is the non-establishment. So you would get, I mentioned last time that a court in Texas had permitted and mandated actually the posting of the Ten Commandments in every public school classroom. Immediately there were lawsuits. And the ACLU, a liberal organization, led the way in saying this is unconstitutional. And that remains a year and a half later tied up in courts and probably will be there for quite some time. So liberals tended to lean into the front end. Conservatives have tended, not exclusively, to lean into the back end on religious liberty, at least of late. And this the statement by the President's Commission on Religious Liberty would be kind of characteristic of that viewpoint. Are you tracking with me here so far? Okay. So what led to this remarkable First Amendment, and particularly the church and state portion of it? Well, as I noted last time, the colonists were by and large coming from a Europe that was riven with what were called then wars of religion. There were 7 such conflicts between 1522 and 1648, with 8 million people killed. Now, so this was really the wake, or in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, sort of marked by Martin Luther, 1517, his famous 95 Theses. But what was really going on, it wasn't so much just you're Catholic or you're Protestant, I'm going to kill you. It was that the kings and princes and Pope didn't want religious diversity in whatever their judicatory was, whatever their state was, whatever their realm was. Religious minority was perceived as potentially a threat. And so it wasn't just people fighting over religion, it was really people fighting over religion and state and the intermingling of the two. But anyhow, this was the soil from which the colonists came. And so this led James Madison, who was the primary advocate, architect of religious freedom, one of our founding fathers, to say the purpose of the separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soul of Europe with blood for centuries. So it was kind of an ingenious solution, just we don't want to have fights about this. Okay, well, let's just take it out of the fighting realm. And yet at the same time, there was a little bit of a minority report among the founders, which was that they generally counted on religion, and generally what they meant by religion was Christianity, to provide moral formation to the citizens in the virtues that made it possible for democracy to work. So John Adams, another of the founders, said, "Our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Do you hear so you've got this kind of the balancing thing. And James Madison himself said, "It is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity toward each other." So they were counting on religion as a kind of force to foster the virtues that made it possible to live together in a democracy where not everybody agreed about everything. So that was the conflicts in Europe were a very important thing in influencing this First Amendment. Second thing was there was already religious diversity in the colonies. There were a host, and I mentioned the names last time, of Christian sects, groups, and denominations. There were Jews. There were Native Americans, which were, their spirituality generally was not recognized, but it was by William Penn in Pennsylvania and Roger Williams in Rhode Island, which were the two colonies that made religious freedom their one of their hallmarks. So, and anyhow, if the founders were to establish a religion, which one would it be? And you could say, well, how about Christianity? Well, how about it? There's, a lot of different varieties of Christianity, as we well know, then and now. And so, which one would it be? And that's still a debate today when any of these measures to introduce, whether it be the Ten Commandments in classrooms or something else, which tradition are you citing from? Not only was there religious diversity, but the state itself was not a singular entity. Just as there is now, there's all these layers and levels of government and jurisdictions. So if you were to mandate a religion in one public school system, would it apply in all? If it was in one state, would it apply in others? How about if it were in one county of one state? Or, so the point is, we say church and state, and it sounds like there's this monolith called church and this monolith called state, but that really wasn't the way it was. It was a mess. And some people regard the mess as our greatest strength in America, that we're kind of messy. We don't just have everything, cut and finished and dried, at least yet. Okay, so third point in this review is that this matter of the relationship of church and state, or religion and politics, has been throughout our 250 years a point of contention. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think I might have thought, without thinking about it much, without doing much reading, that this was kind of a settled and done issue until just recently. Not the case. And so it's always been a bone of contention. But if there's something different now, I think it is that the extremes on both sides tend to sound like they'd like to eliminate the other side. So I wrote for a newspaper, not the one French mentioned, but I wrote for one of the dailies in Seattle for a long time. And I would get really constant comments that, basically said, religion is poison. We should have no religion in the paper. We should have no religion in public life. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is these atheists and secularists are communists and they're threatening our country, and we need to do away with them. So we've kind of got, instead of the genius of America is we're not all on the same page. We have to figure out how to live with each other. And which takes us back to what Madison said about the Christian virtues of love, charity, and forbearance. Now, I also added one point that is not a political or constitutional point, but is a point that I think is telling for me as a Christian, which is Jesus never forced himself, his teachings, his ministry, his faith on anyone. He didn't operate out of force or coercion. Quite the opposite. He rejected that. And, as I mentioned last time, he was put to death by, you might say, an alliance of established religion and political power. Roman Empire and uh, first century Judaism combined forces there. So it was kind of the church and state that did him in. So for me, that's a fairly telling point that Christians had to keep in mind, that we didn't, our main guy was not into coercion or coercion of religious belief. Okay, so that's part one there, the review. Any quick questions or comments before I go on to part two? Kind of warm in here, isn't it? Yeah. I have to struggle to stay awake. What? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, Chris? Oh, no.
One
Sure.
example was that the atheists went to the Supreme Court and took prayer out of school.
Right.
They said everybody shouldn't have to say the Our Father.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the decision was there wouldn't be any, I've forgotten the exact term, but it's a mandated prayer. And the response was, again, from the more left side, was, well, anybody can pray. We're not saying people can't pray or students can't pray. We're just saying there won't be a mandated, pre-selected prayer, which, if you're Jewish or Muslim and in a classroom and we're going to pray the Our Father, that wouldn't quite work for you.
And the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And as I pointed out last time, the words "under God" were an addition in 1954 to the Pledge of Allegiance, driven really by the Cold War, and we were, the adversary was godless communism. So we wanted to emphasize the godiness, or the God side of our operation. I think Eisenhower famously said something like, you should all go to church, I don't care which one it is, or something like that. Anyhow, okay, part two here, and this, I'm going to dwell on this a little bit more. This is drawing on a book called Crossed Purposes. Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. And it's a work of a guy named Jonathan Rauch, who's a scholar at the Brookings Institution, a very reputable policy think tank kind of thing. And one thing that's interesting about Rauch, a social scientist, is that he's an atheist. He's a gay man. And his cultural familial background was Jewish. So nothing in that background predisposes him to be particularly positive toward either religion or Christianity. And indeed, in a 2003 piece in The Atlantic, just about the time of I don't know if you remember, the new atheists were kind of on the rise in Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, everywhere they were. He was sort of new atheist adjacent at that time. Rauch was, and he wrote a piece basically for The Atlantic saying we'd all be better off if religion just went away. Subsequently, he said, that's the dumbest thing I ever wrote. And he has now come to the conclusion that Christianity has functioned as a load-bearing wall. Those are his words. A load-bearing wall for our democracy, which has now collapsed. That this was one of the main load-bearing walls in the building of democracy, but it has now collapsed. Okay, how has it collapsed? What does he mean by that? What is the broken bargain that he talks about? I'll come to that in just a minute. Rauch's argument, I think, can be summed up by saying that the church, Christians, and churches have a lot to answer for when it comes to the mess we're in today, meaning a polarized system that is incapable of dealing with its most important challenges. So this is kind of an exercise in what Jesus said, take the log out of your own eye first before you presume to, take the splinter out of your neighbor's eye. And so that's kind of where Roush is coming from. And he admits that as an atheist, he's maybe on shaky ground here, but he's writing as a social scientist, not really that. So the bargain, what is the bargain that has been broken? I think I have a bit of that on your sheet. The bargain requires that the Constitution be interpreted in a way that is consistent with the well-being of law-abiding faith communities, and that God's word be interpreted in a way that is consistent with the well-being of democratic pluralism. Pluralism simply means that there are a variety of religions, variety of political points of view, there's not unanimity. What's the motto? E pluribus unum, out of many, one. But it doesn't, you're always going to have the many. So Roush is saying here, this bargain is implicit, but America depends on it nonetheless. In other words, church needs and benefits from religious liberty, freedom, which the state and constitution mandate and protect, while the state needs the church to respect democratic pluralism and not try to make one religion the dominant. So there's one of the themes, of course, of our founding was avoiding tyranny of the minority by the majority. So this is part of the bargain. And he says the bargain has now been broken. Well, what does that mean? Are you still with me? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the nods. Okay, so he says that Christianity in America now falls in one of three categories. Now, he's going to speak in very broad and general terms, and there will be exceptions to any such generalizations, okay? So that said, there's something here to offend everyone. He says the first type, or the first sort of type today is what he calls thin Christianity. And this, he says, characterizes the mainline traditions. That's my crowd. And I think I listed what are characteristically seen as the mainline. They're usually the descendants of European churches from the Reformation: Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians, Congregationalists, etc. Sometimes referred to as liberal Christians, sometimes referred to as progressive. So he says this Christianity has so adapted or accommodated itself to the secular culture that it has little distinctive to say. You tracking with me? It's kind of like what Gertrude Stein said about Oakland. There's no there. So he's saying that mainline Christianity has so accommodated itself to secular culture that it doesn't really have something to contribute anymore. He writes, I did not foresee the extent to which mainline Protestantism would collapse as a source of public values. We don't have to reach too far back to remember a time when mainline theologians like Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich would be featured on the cover of Time magazine and were influential in the culture, along with figures like Martin Buber and Bishop Sheehan, for example. So he writes that we're suffering, my tradition, the mainlines, are suffering from a cultural trade deficit, which means if the church becomes a net importer of values from the secular world, then it becomes morally derivative instead of morally formative. Rather than shaping secular values, it merely reflects them and melts into the society around it. So a couple of little anecdotal examples. I was talking to a friend last week who lives in Vermont, goes to a Congregational Church, Congregational United Church of Christ. And he complained to me that what he hears from the pulpit most Sunday is what he calls the gospel according to the New York Times. In other words, it's kind of political commentary left of center. I visited a church not long ago where the minister welcomed people by saying, "You may struggle to believe in God. That's okay. Here at this church, we just want to be good neighbors." Now, nothing wrong with being good neighbors, of course. And there are a lot of ways to do that. The Elks Club down the street from where I live in Seattle seems to be engaged in good neighborly activity. Certainly the Rotary that some of you belong to does. And so at least some people have said, well, if that's all it is, I don't need church for that. You get what I'm saying, though, about a manifestation of thin, trying to be maybe inclusive, trying to be welcoming, like that. So in 2005, a couple of sociologists of religion did a study of teenagers and young adults who had been raised in these churches. And they concluded that what the faith they came out with or had was moralistic, therapeutic deism. I know that's a weird term, but what it means is keep in mind we're talking about thinning. Moralistic is, and this is what the teens and the young adults would say they had been taught. God wants people to be nice and fair. The primary, that's the moralistic side of it. Be this, be a good person. The therapeutic was they understood the central goal of life to be personal happiness and feeling good about yourself. That's kind of a therapeutic, not knocking therapy. I'm just saying that's kind of you drive that. And deism, there is a God, but not much involved in human life. Very distant. So moralistic, therapeutic deism was, and so I think Rausch would say there's not enough there to really make a contribution to say things in the public realm that are going to influence people and make a difference. Okay, so I beat up on my tradition. Now let's turn to the next one. His next category is sharp. Sharp Christianity. And this, again, a generalization, but he's talking mainly about what we've come to describe as evangelical Protestants, particularly the 83% of them that have been supporters of President Trump. Evangelical, he describes, this is a quote from Rausch, a divisive, fearful, partisan, and un-Christ-like version of Christianity. And if I'd left out the thin part, we'd probably just, oh yeah, that's sweet. He writes, I certainly didn't foresee the extent to which evangelical Protestantism would turn resentful, confrontational, and authoritarian. And he notes that there is kind of a new wall of separation in the evangelical Protestant world, which is practices, behaviors, and virtues that one embodies within church and family seem to be set aside when these folks go into the public square or into the wider community, where Roush says, uh, behaving in public life with conduct whose cruelty Christians would abhor in their church lives. In other words, there's such a dangerous cultural force that it's okay to be nasty and cruel, uh, even though you wouldn't do that in your church. So, and by and large, I think it would be fair to say that the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount, who said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, has been traded out in sharp Christianity for an aggressive cultural warrior. Kind of Jesus the cage fighter, as Mark Driscoll argued, a fundamentalist in Seattle at that time. Okay, so that's what you've got, thin and sharp, neither one upholding their part of the bargain. Category 3, this is where we get to the hope of thick. Thick Christianity. What does that mean? On the one hand, it means those who don't simply blend into the secular culture, as the thins do, but on the other hand, don't seek to dominate, turn confrontational and resentful, as the sharps do. So who are we talking about here? I think the Catholic Church might qualify. It's a thick culture, has its own school system, has certain expectations of people. Goes against the dominant culture on some key issues. Eastern Orthodox might also qualify. That's one of the most rapidly growing churches in North America. And it is, again, a thick culture, a culture of great ritual, of art, the icons of beauty, of enchantment. And one of the complaints about the thins is the loss of enchantment, that it's become too rational and too moralistic. So, but the group that Roush really points to was a surprise to me and maybe to you, and that is the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. Another thick culture, for sure, but also a group, and this would apply to the Catholics and to the Eastern Orthodox and to the Seventh-day Adventists that Rich mentioned. All of these groups have been religious minorities in this country which have experienced some level of persecution. In the case of the Mormons, really serious persecution. I know less about the Seventh-day Adventists and what they've experienced. But what that means is they really, really value their freedom of religion. They really, really value not having the state taking over. And they also feel a responsibility to support the civil order. So the president of the Mormons, Dalen Oaks, writes, I don't know if this is on your sheet or not, we have always had to work through serious political conflicts, but today too many approach that task as if their preferred outcome must entirely prevail over all others, even in our pluralistic society. You hear what they're saying? You see, we have sides now that feel like they have to have total victory over the other side. He says that's not our thing. Our thing is we need the freedom that's guaranteed by the Constitution, but we don't want to overtake everybody else. We don't want to, at least by force, make everybody Latter-day Saints. So he continues, rendering unto Caesar in good faith requires religious persons and associations to acknowledge that what their government does for them, and to be faithful in fulfilling the reciprocal responsibilities they owe to the government and to their fellow citizens. So this led to an amazing thing in Utah in 2015, which is referred to as the Utah Compromise. The Latter-day Saints joined with the LGBTQ advocacy groups to come up with a Senate bill that protected the legal rights of sexual minorities and same-sex marriages, which they oppose, and yet also preserves the freedom of Mormons, for example, to not they don't have to perform same-sex marriages. So, and they are free to express their views about what they think about marriage, as long as it's not, I think there's some language about not disruptive or something else. But it's an amazing compromise. They didn't need to win everything. They're willing to support the rights of minorities, but they also wanted their own protected. So this to Roush is holding up the bargain between church and state. So I'm going to end with, and then we have a good amount of time to talk if you're still with me. And okay. So at the end of his thing, Roush says, this is a guy who said we'd be better off without religion. Okay. Now he's saying the peculiar doctrines of Christianity, he's still an atheist, are what this country needs to heal right now. What does he mean by that? So he did a little experiment. He asked Christians he knew to give him their elevator speech. 15 seconds, what's it all about? They characteristically said three things. Do not be afraid. Be like Jesus. Forgive one another. Over and over again. Do not be afraid. Be like Jesus. Forgive one another. Roush goes on to say those map onto Madison's civic virtues in this way. Listen, this is really good. Be not afraid, which appears 144 times in the Bible. It's not like it's isolated or just kind of a footnote. Frequent. Maps onto, you're going to lose elections. Don't panic. It's not the end of the world. You may learn something and improve as a result. How many times in the last 20 years have we been told this is the most important election in America's history, and if we don't get this right, everything is lost? Be not afraid. Second, be like Jesus translates to all men, all persons are created equal, including the lowest and the least. And a society is measured by how it protects the most vulnerable members of it. Be like Jesus. Number three, forgive one another translates into, I love this old kind of antique word, forbearance. Sometimes you win elections, but the point of politics is not to crush, destroy, or eliminate the other side. They are your fellow citizens. You are going to be sharing the country with one another. Forgive one another. So he's saying that despite the fact that right now Christianity is not fulfilling its part of the bargain and making the contribution that we need to sustain democracy, it does have within it some peculiar doctrines that are really critical for the healing of our country at this time. Do not be afraid. Be like Jesus. Forgive one another. So that's it for now. Thank you so much, and let's have your questions.